or intro, I guess, not update, intro.
Ashley's given me 5 minutes, so I'm going to try to do this as expeditiously as I can. I'm not going to make you look at me. I'm going to make you look at my screen, if I may. Here it is. You see it, Ashley?
We do not.
All right, try it again. How about that?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, I'm doing the technology team. The primary purpose is to maintain and update the EMG intranet. We provide ongoing website training to the volunteers, to the program admins, which are the people that actually manage each committee. We monitor data entry, download data for the agent, other committees. Our technical duties include the yearly schedule for office duty, entering events such as the one coming up on November the 13th, maintain the calendar, upload documents, keep the homepage up to date with current information on the program, along with Ashley's monthly word from our agent. We also acquire attendance at our at our membership meetings. There's 5 a year. We create reports for engagement and retention and the agent as requested. We also monitor and download the hours and years of service and work with the agent and the coordinator, Anna, on the annual awards due, as well as report at least twice a year the current volunteer and education hours for individuals to the agent. The tech team has 4 members. I am the chair of that team. Kat Causey, who I know you've all met, is wonderful. She's our comptroller, but she's also the primary contact for the listserv. And the listserv is one of our communication tools, as well as the ability to send out communication from the internet. Kat also is one of the moderators, along with Ashley, for using the listserv, which I'll talk a little bit about in just 2 minutes. And then Panna, our program coordinator, is also on this team. And of course, Ashley is on all committees. What you're looking at on the screen is actually, this is the technology page on the internet. I just want to pull your attention down to the bottom of that, because there's a couple of things that occur on all programs. Every program has a calendar. There's nothing on mine, so I'm not going to click it. But on the right-hand side over here are program pages. And on every program page, every committee, there is a technology committee description here, but on every other committee, all of the stuff that we've stood up here and talked to you about is all written down, and it's on every committee page. So if you wanted to say public events, what does that look like? You'd go to the public events page and you'd go to the bottom and you would just click on committee description. Also, the annual reports are there, and that kind of tells you what this committee has done over the last year. And you can go back and look for the last 5 years, I think is how long we've been doing it. But it also gives you some problems, some goals, and this form has actually been updated a bit more this year. There's also the ability here to email the program committee. If you've decided that there's a committee here that you really think you want more information about, then you have the option to email this program committee. And if you click on that, it'll bring up all of the committee names. If you just want to send a message to me or just to Kat, you just click off these other ones. And then you can fill this in and you can send this. That's one of the beauties of the internet. The thing about sending an email message is that it is not, you can't get a response to it. If you want a response, include your email in it. And I think I'm probably pushing the buttons here in terms of time, but do look at all of the program pages. Look at all right, and that's it. Are there any questions for me? Take it away, Ashley.
Awesome. Thanks, Wanda. 2 things to check out, or one thing on the internet that you guys might want to check out is we do have a pollinator garden work day out at Briggs on October 30th. That's really for you guys and for your mentors if you can make it. It'll be really fun. It's a great way to be out at Briggs. It's a great way to get together even when we can't get together. So October 30th, another event we have coming up on November 4th is actually just a social mingle. That's not on the internet, but I will include all that information in today's email. So with that, I am actually gonna turn it over to Dr. Lee Butler. Lee, do you wanna take it away?
Yep, I'm
ready.
ready.
So if you guys find yourselves muted, that is not about you. That is about Zoom, and it's a little bit easier. But feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will be taking those at the end, if that sounds good to you, Lee.
That sounds perfect.
Awesome.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Hope you all are having a great morning up in Durham County. Sun is shining, right? It's a beautiful day. As Ashley said, if we'll just put your questions in the chat, I'll save some time at the end and get them then. I am going to cover quite a bit of material. If you've ever heard me speak before, I always offer up my slides. So don't kill yourself trying to take notes. I'll gladly send you a copy of all these for you to go back and reference if needed. So a little bit about myself. I am a native of North Carolina. I've grew up near Greensboro, but I've worked here at NC State for 22 years now, doing all things turf diseases and turfgrass pathology. A big part of my job is running the diagnostics lab, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but also do a lot of research in the field and in the lab, working with graduate students, undergraduate students, and doing extension stuff like this. So a little bit of everything. But today I just want to go over the more common questions that I get from folks when it comes to managing diseases of turfgrass. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll have a much better understanding of when you deal with these things. All right. First thing I like to show, and this is one of my favorite slides, it's just very simple. The gentleman in the photo there, Dr. L.T. Lucas, he was the turfgrass pathologist here at NC State from 1968 till about 1999, so about a little over 30 years. And we were all at a meeting with the USGA, the United States Golf Association. And somebody asked him, what's the best thing I can do to manage all these diseases? And he said, just maintain healthy turf, right? And that's easier said than done, but he's right. And you want to remember, what is essential for any plant really, but for turf, think about these first four points here. And the first one is light. And this is the one that I run into the most, particularly with homeowners, is not having a good understanding of just how much sunlight is needed. It's really tough to have both heavy, dense canopy trees and good turf grass. Even if it's a shade tolerant variety and all that good stuff, it can still be a challenge. So make sure you're getting good, adequate sunlight. Make sure it's getting good airflow, and that's not just up above the canopy or in the lawn. Make sure you're also getting good air exchange in the root zone, right? The roots need to breathe just as much as the foliage does, and that's achieved through making sure you have good drainage, adequate drainage, aerification. So when you're pulling the cores out of the ground, that helps a lot with that. Food-wise, we're talking about fertilizer here, so make sure you're getting adequate fertility. We have, if you haven't been already, we have our website, Turf Files. We have maintenance calendars for all the turfgrass species in the state. And you're going to hear from Dr. Grady Miller later, I believe. And he's the one that does all those. And they're very, very good as far as telling you how much to fertilize and when to do it, and at what ratios, and things like that. So make sure you're getting adequate fertilizer. And then there's water, right? If you have irrigation systems, make sure you're being judicious with it, getting the right amounts out and doing it at the right time of day. One of the bigger mistakes I see with, once again, with homeowners is they have irrigation systems is they run them at the wrong time of day. So they want to run them, maybe when they get home from work or early in the evening. And that's not for a couple of reasons. One, from a disease standpoint, you're extending the leaf wetness period. And you'll see here in a minute, we'll talk about fungi and how much they love water. But if you're keeping that leaf blade wet for a longer period than it naturally would be with dewfall, you're going to increase your chances for disease. So watering in the early morning hours is the best. I know that's not always the easiest, but if you have a programmable system that can easily be achieved to run the water, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, you're reducing the amount you lose to evaporation, things like that. But make sure you're getting good water if you have that luxury, right? Otherwise, you're dependent on Mother Nature, right? And normally here in North Carolina, we get pretty good rainfall, right? We're blessed to be in a part of the world that gets good, frequent rainfall. And the other thing to remember is just how drought tolerant these grasses are, right? Even tall fescue. I think a lot of people underestimate just how tough tall fescue is. In the summer months, it will turn brown, and it's just going semi-dormant. It's not going to die. When we get into these drought periods, they can go for a really long time if you can stand a little bit of brown. But as soon as we get some good rainfall events, it'll perk right back up and recover quite well. But despite doing all of that, if we're maintaining very high value turf, you're going to need protection. And when I say protection, that's the use of fungicides. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. All right. When it comes to fungicides, I'm not going to get too deep into making recommendations because it's hard to keep up with. Just know that there are really, really good resources out there that you can look at. The one that most of you will probably go to will be Turf Files, which is our website. And we have profiles for all our diseases, our major diseases here in North Carolina. And you can look up fungicide recommendations. Not only do we have them listed, the ones that are on the label, but we also rank them. That's one thing that you won't find in a lot of other places. And that's based off our own field research. We do a lot of fungicide research trials throughout the state, from the mountains to the coast, and a lot of it here in Raleigh at our research lab. But that's what we're basing those rankings on. So that helps a lot. So, and that's something that reminded myself is one thing to remember is just because a particular disease is on a fungicide label doesn't necessarily mean that fungicide is all that good for that disease, right? So you got to kind of be careful. Just because it's labeled for it doesn't mean it's the best. And that's where, when you go to like our website, we have them ranked. That'll help you choose a good product if you choose to do that. All right. I wouldn't be a good turfgrass pathologist or plant pathologist if I didn't show the disease triangle. But this is a very simple but very important concept when it comes to managing plant diseases, right? In order for us to have a disease, and this is regardless of host, this could be on any plant, you have to have these three things, right? You have to have a host. In our case, we're talking about turf grasses. And what's unique about turfgrass systems are they're perennial crops, right? This is different from, say, annual bedding plants or field crops where you're changing things out maybe throughout the year 1 or 2 times, or rotating to different things every year, where the host is always changing. But for us, the host stays the same. When you see the pathogen part of the triangle, we're talking about fungi, nematodes, viruses, bacteria. These are all disease-causing agents. For turfgrass, the majority of what we deal with are fungi. All right. We also deal with nematodes, but where you all are located here in the Piedmont, you really don't have to deal with nematodes all that much. They tend to be more prevalent in sandier soils. So as you get into eastern North Carolina, you get down into the sandhills, like with Pinehurst and whatnot. You'll definitely run into more nematode issues than you do up here in the heavier clay soils. But for us, we normally deal with fungi, right? And believe it or not, those are almost always present. So we have these two things that are pretty much always there, and that leaves us with the one thing, and that's the environment. And that's what kicks off all of our disease issues. And I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but fungi love water, right? So when we get into rainy events, prolonged rainy events, and things are not drying out, that tends to be when we have our more severe disease issues in turf. And you all know the other thing that we have here that we're just blessed with here in North Carolina is humidity, right? In the summer months, there's no shortage of that. So plenty of moisture in the air, and the environment can be very, very conducive for disease outbreaks. That's what makes, as a plant pathologist doing disease research in North Carolina is absolutely fantastic. We have the rainfall, we have the humidity, and we're in what's known as the transition zone, right? we can grow all of the grasses, but we can't grow any of them perfectly, right? If you go up north, a lot of folks will grow things like Kentucky bluegrass, and they'll be just flawless because the environment is absolutely, perfect for it. As you go further south, you get into the warm season grasses, same thing. But we're kind of in this middle part where, the grasses are kind of confused. And that's why you see a lot of different grasses around here. You see stuff like tall fescue, zoysia grass, Bermuda, so on and so forth. So that's what makes it pretty unique here. All right. So just real quick, a couple characteristics of fungi. I said, they need that water or high humidity. We can check that box here in our area. They do grow and cause disease in a pretty narrow temperature range. And I'll talk about why that's important here in a minute. They are everywhere. Their primary role in nature is decomposition. So when they're not eating on our plants, they're eating on organic matter, dead material, or they're just in a kind of a resting phase, waiting for that environment to tilt in their favor. And then that's when they start to eat our plants and use it as a food source. So temperature and water are the most important factors for influencing disease development. For foliar diseases, we usually look at low nighttime temperatures and how long the leaves are wet. And then for root and crown diseases, we look at soil temperature and soil moisture. All right. And a couple of examples just to show you diseases that are triggered by the low nighttime temperature. Dollar spot, worldwide, is the most common disease of turf across all turfgrass types. Really don't see it on tall fescue, but definitely see it in Kentucky bluegrass, all of our warm season grasses. But in the spring of the year, and even right now, we have dollar spot active at the research farm. But usually in the spring of the year, once you cross that 50-degree mark as the low nighttime temperature for 5 or 6 days in a row, that's when conditions are conducive for that disease. Brown patch, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with in tall fescue, a little bit warmer at 60 degrees, and then Pythium blight, which also attacks tall fescue. You're talking about getting on into the summer at that point. So early summer when the lows are upper 60s, low 70s, when we see that. Some soil-borne diseases, we look at soil temperature. A couple that around here, we don't really deal with summer patch or take-all patch, but you will see spring dead spot. That is the most common disease on Bermuda grass and zoysia grass around here. That's actually happening right now. So in the fall of the year, when the soil temperatures are between 60 and 80, which I think the soil temperature is probably upper 60s, maybe barely over 70 right now. So we're right in the perfect window for that fungus to be active. It's doing its damage right now, but you won't see that damage until next spring when the grass is green up. And that's one thing, that you probably catch on to really quick, that, whoever all these geniuses were that named turfgrass diseases, they kept it really simple. And it's a thing of beauty, actually, right? Summer patch. I mean, when do you think that occurs? It's a patch of dead grass in the summer. Take-all patch. It's a fungus that takes all your grass in a perfect little patch. Spring dead spot. You've got dead spots in the spring of the year. Large patch, same thing. You got a gigantic, large patch of dead grass. So I do love that part about turfgrass disease names, the common names. But when you go into the disease profiles, you'll see these things where we'll say, watch soil temperature, watch the air temperature, whatever. And if, the air temperature is very easy to look up. Soil temperature can be a little more challenging, but it's not. If you've never been, I highly encourage you to go to the NC State Climate Office. They have weather stations all over the state. You can pick one pretty close to your area, and you can look up this stuff, very, very easy. It's free, a wonderful resource. That's what we use to predict when we start our research trials and things like that. All right. So talk a little bit about diagnosing diseases, because that can be a challenge, right? For the most part, you're going to learn that a lot of our diseases are some form of a circle, right? They do spread in a radial fashion, but that's not always the case. Certain diseases that produce a lot of spores. So spores to a fungus are like seeds to a plant. It's a way to disseminate and spread. And you talk about something like Pythium blight and gray leaf spot, which are in these two photos. I show these photos all the time. I took these photos and I have no clue which one is which. What I'm getting there's no way to tell. I have to use a microscope, or we're going to have to look closer with a hand lens for signs and symptoms of each disease to tell them apart. So it can be tricky at times. It's not always as easy as looking online at photos and trying to match it up. So it can be a challenge. But a couple things to keep in mind is there are some key things that'll separate a true disease from other things. Just remember, there are a lot of things that kill turf. Up in this upper right-hand picture, this is herbicide injury on a centipede grass lawn. And the thing to look for is things like straight lines, right? Pretty much everything we do in turf, we try to do in straight lines, right? If you look in the picture down in the bottom left, you can see the mowing stripes. When we fertilize, we try to go in straight lines, things like that. So when you walk out onto a lawn and it's having trouble, look for things like that, right? If it's in a very linear fashion, it's probably not a disease or an insect. It's probably something we've done, right? The other thing to pay attention to is it's pretty odd or rare that you'll see 100% dead turf directly adjacent to 100% healthy turf. So when you got that very sharp line, that's usually a sign that it's not a disease. It's not always the case, and I'll show you why in a second, but a lot of times it's not. If you look in the picture at the bottom left, this is a very severe case of large patch, which is happening right now on zoysia grass. Also occurs in Bermuda grass, St. Augustine, centipede, the warm season grasses. But even this is very severe, even right in the middle of that patch, there's still green blades of grass, right? It's not total devastation. And once again, it's forming some version of a circle, right? So circles tend to be an indicator. There can be some exceptions to that, and this is one of them. This was actually from a home lawn in Chapel Hill area, zoysia grass lawn. The picture on the right is spring dead spot. The homeowner in the picture on the left thought they had spring dead spot, and you can see why they do look similar, but this is actually injury from applying Roundup or glyphosate to control some late winter weeds. We don't recommend that on zoysia grass. You can do that on Bermuda while it's still dormant, but we don't recommend that on zoysia. But the thing to notice is are these odd shapes, right? So you got this funny looking T-shaped thing in here. There's a square right here, right? So, always stand back and look for odd shapes and things. And it helps to have the site history. And the spring dead spot is one of those cases where you do have 100% dead turf right against 100% healthy. And that can be a little tricky, but do note that it's forming the little circles, right? You're seeing some almost perfect circles, right? There's always exceptions to everything, and this is a good example, but this, once again, rare case. This is on a golf course putting green where we've got perfect circles. We've got 100, you got completely dead up against completely healthy, and they're going in a straight line. You can only see two of the little dots, but if you can see across the whole green, they go in a straight line. And all this is a hydraulic leak from the mower. So one of the hoses on the mower is dripping that very hot oil onto the turf, and it burned the foliage in perfect little circles. One thing you can do is mark the edges. This is what this person did. This is a great idea. I don't know if I would use push pins, but maybe a little bit of paint or a flag or a stick, whatever. Just mark the edges. If it truly is a disease, it'll continue to expand and it'll move beyond your marks. And we'll do so within a matter of a day or, within a few days. Because when they're actively growing, they're going to move, all right? Another thing to think about is you got to think outside the box, right? I told you there are a lot of things that kill turf, and this is a fine example. This is a home lawn in eastern North Carolina, centipede grass. They thought they had large patch, but if any of you notice, anything that jumps out to you is this very bright white sidewalk, right? So they had pressure washed this with some chemicals to clean it up, and that the turf just did not like that. They killed a lot of their lawn with the runoff from that. Had absolutely nothing to do with the disease, right? Another thing to remember is it's not always about what you can see up top, right? This is a golf course putting green down in the Wilmington area. They thought this was some sort of disease, but when we take a soil profiler and just look down in the soil, it has this very distinct anaerobic layer, what's known as black layer. If any of you have ever experienced this, it'll knock your socks off. It's the nastiest, stinking, rotten egg smell. Very, very nasty smell, but it's a sign that you have very poor drainage. So taking a soil probe and checking the soil, right? The health of the soil, giving it the old sniff test, as I call it. That's another thing that's a very quick and easy on-site diagnostic thing that you can do, all right? Want to roll now into some stuff from the diagnostics lab. And I'm just going to show you some stuff just real quick from last year. We haven't gone through and analyzed everything from this year, but last year was a little wonky, as it was for everybody with the COVID stuff. I think it is interesting to note just about the plant disease and insect clinic in general. And I'm sure that you've all submitted samples to them over the years. But it's a pretty neat story that was actually started in the 1950s to diagnose tobacco diseases. And living in Durham, you all know that tobacco was once king. You know, tobacco pretty much built Durham for sure. And you know, and then everybody else was like, what about us, right? And so they started diagnosing all diseases of all crops. Insects were added in the 70s. That Dr. L.T. Lucas, he started doing turfgrass diagnostics in the 70s, mostly from home lawns. Didn't really start working with golf courses and professional turf until the 80s when it became a thing. But it's been going on for a long time. In 2005, we separated from the plant disease and insect clinic and started the turf diagnostics lab. So we are separate from them. We use the same database and some of the same tools, but we are a separate entity from them. And that's part of what I do is managing that. Just to show you, we do get samples from all over the country, and we actually get them from all over the world. I didn't include the whole world, but we do get them from all over the country. And I'll show you what we get, but about 45% of those come from North Carolina, with 74% coming from the Southeast. So very much a regional thing. But we do get a lot of samples from out west, up north, and from Texas, Oklahoma. And a lot of it has to do with the labs that are out there and where they're located. But we do get them from everywhere. We get about 420 or so samples a year, or submissions a year. So that translates to about 800 to 900 plugs of turfgrass. So we have a lot of turf that comes through, but the majority of it is from golf courses. All right. So you see 80% of all of our turf samples come from golf, and that's almost exclusively from golf course putting greens. All right. And we'll talk about that in just a second. And then you see landscapes, get quite a bit of ornamental grasses, do a lot of work with Hoffman. I'm pretty sure you folks probably are familiar with Hoffman Nursery up in Rougemont or Bahama. So we work with them a lot. Then we don't really get all that much from sod farms or sports turf, right? So why do we get so much from golf? You know, that's why people, especially people that are not in the golf business, but there are a couple things. Number one, that's one of the most high valued turf settings that there is, right? You know, you're talking about millions of dollars when you're talking about golf course putting greens. The other thing to keep in mind is they're mowing those plants at 1/10 of an inch to 1/8 of an inch. All right. It's kind of hard to even wrap my mind around that you can mow a plant down that small and it can tolerate people walking on it, mowers going over it, you know, all day, every day. So very, very stressful situation for those plants on a golf course putting green. So it does set them up for it to be more susceptible to fungal diseases. So that's the majority of what we deal with. And that's the majority of where our research and focus is. But we do quite a bit with landscape stuff too, and we'll talk about that. Of the turfgrass samples we get, these first two bars are all golf course putting greens. So Bermuda grass and creeping bent grass or annual bluegrass. Annual bluegrass is a weed, but sometimes it's embraced on golf course putting greens, especially up in the mountains of North Carolina. But those are all golf. And then you see tall fescue, zoysia, so on and so forth. And if we just look at landscape turf, tall fescue and zoysia grass tend to be right there together every year as the top two, right? You know, you think if you break the state down by mountains, Piedmont, and coastal plain, tall fescue is the predominant turf in the mountains and the Piedmont. So 2/3 of the state, most homeowners have tall fescue. When you get into eastern North Carolina, you get into St. Augustine, Centipede, Bermuda, and here in the Triangle, in places like that, and you get around the Charlotte area, you get into these higher end suburban neighborhoods, you're seeing more zoysia grass going in. You know, I'm not going to get into climate change, but things are changing. We are, you know, trending warmer for sure around here, and people kind of get frustrated trying to manage tall fescue. And they'll convert over to zoysia grass. And zoysia grass is a very, very good long grass, very tough. And so we're seeing that. And there may come a day where zoysia will outrank tall fescue, but that's to be seen, right? So if you ever want to submit samples, you can go through your county extension office. That's what we recommend. Those folks are fantastic. Oftentimes they can help you but if not, they know how to submit samples and they'll guide you through that. But we have a link over there on the left side of our website that'll get you there. We also have our turfgrass disease profiles and some other stuff there if you ever want to go look that stuff up. All right. A couple things to keep in mind if you're going to submit samples, and that's how to do it properly. And this is where people mess up sometimes, but you know, this is a golf example, but it doesn't matter. This applies to home loans as well. But out here in the middle where the damage is very severe, that's where most people want to pull a sample, and that's the worst place to take a sample. All right. If you go right there in the middle, all that black stuff is actually algae that's kind of coming in and invading the thin area. But if you pull a sample from right there, all we're going to find is what I call buzzard fungi. So we're looking for the lions and tigers, and those are going to be on the leading edge. So when you actually pull your sample, you want to get about half damaged and half healthy right on the edge of that circle or right on the edge of that leading damage. And that'll be absolutely perfect, because if it truly is a disease, that's where we're going to find it. So these are little golf course cup cutter plugs, but just to give you a reference, you know, if you're pulling a sample from a home lawn, you know, about four inches square is plenty big. And one sample is enough if you take it from the right area. You only want to go as deep as the root system. You can shake off the excess soil. You know, we don't really do anything with the soil. We're just looking at the plants themselves. Wrap them up tight in aluminum foil, and that's perfect. All right. Just showing you some pictures here. So this is always a good one. You know, anytime I get turfgrass samples, they always use the cup cutter, right? This one photo, this gadget here. So this is the tool that puts the hole in the green, you know, to put the ball into. So they send cup cutter plugs like this, and when they wrap them in foil, especially if this shows up around lunchtime, I'm like, oh man, somebody sent me 3 triple cheeseburgers, right? But nah, it's just turf. But that's what it reminds me of when I see it. But the best part about this is that they did a good job of labeling them. So if you're going to send multiple samples, be sure you label it like front yard, backyard, side yard, whatever. ABC, you know, you can put, as long as it makes some sense to you, because when I send the report back to you, I'm going to reference whatever you put on it. Because there are times where people will send multiple samples and they won't label them, and I may find different things. And then there's a communication breakdown as far as to what came from where, right? Try to keep soil off the leaves if you can. That makes it a little tougher on our end if you get dirt all in the foliage. And that's why we like to wrap them tight in that aluminum foil. You can ship them if you want to, but we are close to you all. You know, it's not that hard to drive a sample down. And we've actually moved. So we used to be in the plant disease and insect clinic, which was on main campus, which could be a real challenge to get to for the average person with parking and whatnot. But now we're at what's called Varsity Research Building. We're actually in Google Maps. If you search NC State Turf Diagnostics Lab, we come up. But you can pull right up to the front door and drop it off very easy. And a lot of folks do that are within driving distance. So keep that in mind. A couple things we've done is we no longer use paper forms. The clinic does, but I did away with that. We're all digital now. We use the same database as the plant disease and insect clinic. It's very easy to use. It's like most everything else we do in our lives now. You know, username and password, and it keeps track of all your samples. It's a really, really good system. And so we just have you go in and enter your information. The other thing that I require are photos. That's something we started like a year or so ago. And it helps any diagnostician a tremendous amount to be able to see exactly what it is you're seeing. This is a really severe disease called mini ring. Once again, there's that cool little name, little miniature rings on a golf course putting green. But not only does it help me see what you're seeing, but I can see the surrounding landscape, right? I can see if you have shade issues or not, and things like that. So just a photo from standing height, looking out across is all we need. And oftentimes you can just email me a photo and say, hey, do you think this is even worth submitting the sample? Do you even think this is a disease? And oftentimes I may be able to help you without even having to go through the submitting the sample, right? So photos are required and very, very helpful, all right? I just want to go through real quick what it is we do with these things, because I think sometimes it's a mystery. Like, do we put them into a machine and push buttons, and it makes a lot of bloops and bloops, and it's nothing sophisticated, honestly. And that's what I want to show you. It is a lot of science, but it's also a lot of art. But when the samples come in, we incubate them in a high-tech incubation chamber. also known as a plastic bag, right? And what we're doing is we're getting the moisture up. So remember I told you fungi love moisture. So just like leaving that old bologna sandwich in your Ziploc bag for too many days, gets mold all over it. Same concept with these turfgrass samples. So we put them in there overnight, and then we look at them the next day. So we do use microscopes, a couple different kinds. One we use, it's known as a dissecting scope. This is nothing more than just a high-tech hand lens, right? And then we have your traditional microscope, your compound microscope, all right? So the first step is that, this is a photo of me from 60 years ago when my beard was brown and not gray. But looking through the dissecting scope, just the hand lens, this is the first thing we're doing. We're just going to look down into the canopy of the turf. And this is what it looks like, right? So I'm just looking for a few things here. Very easy. We're looking to see if we see lesions or marks, or do we see any kind of fungal growth, which I don't see any of that in this photo. The one thing I do see here, which is kind of unique, is if you'll notice the oldest leaf on these plants, like this one here that I have my cursor on, is turning brown and senescing, right? The new growth, you can see all these new leaves that are coming out. They still haven't even unfolded yet. They look perfectly fine. So when we see that, that's usually a red flag that something's going wrong with the root system. There's something going on down below, and that's where we need to go look, right? We'll see all kinds of things when we look into the foliage. This is what algae looks like up close. From a distance, it just looks like blackish, greenish scuzz. But when you look at it through the dissecting scope, you can actually see the little filaments, right? Sometimes you will see fungal structures. This is a disease known as anthracnose. These little spiky things are called acerbuli, and they're full of spores. So it's a key feature for identifying that disease. And that would be all I would have to do is look at this and say, boom, there it is. The symptoms match. This is anthracnose. Sometimes you'll see oddball things like this, like, why is this turfgrass purple at the tip? And all this is cold weather injury. So this is new growth on a plant. Got shocked by a really cold night, and the leaf tips will often turn purplish red. We'll be seeing that here soon, especially with a lot of our warm season grasses. As soon as we have some, get down into the 30s and have some cold nights. In the spring of the year, you'll see this, right? You'll look under there and you'll be like, oh man, look at all those fungal things, and no, all that's just pollen, okay? The reason I like to show this is because it does look kind of funky, but what's the one thing you notice is that the plants are extremely healthy, okay? If this were a fungus and these were fungal structures, these leaves would be necrotic. They would have lesions, black and brown, shriveled up. And that's something to remember when you go to looking at these things on your own with a hand lens is what I'm seeing actually causing damage, all right? Sometimes you'll see residue from when chemicals have been applied. So that's always my favorite, is when somebody sprays, 5 or 6 fungicides, and then they send me a sample and say, well, what is it? I don't know, you've already controlled it. So the point is send your samples before you make fungicide applications. All right, that makes me happy, or it'll make you happy because I'll be able to help you. But fungicides work, and they work very well. So keep that in mind. All right. Then we'll go down, if we don't make any grand discoveries in the foliage, we'll go down and look in the soil profile. And looking at this, there's a couple things to note, and that's a very severe layering issue. You can see where you got these layers in here. So this is from a golf course green where they've been applying sand, but that does cause a problem with water movement. You can see they've been aerifying or pulling cores out of the ground and backfilling them with sand. That's what that little column there is. But looking for things like that, just looking at the overall health of the root system, that always reminds me of chocolate cake when I see that. You can see that obviously I like to eat, and all these things make me think of food throughout the day. Maybe it's just going crazy sitting at the microscope, but when I see that photo, it just looks like that chocolate cake I once had for my birthday. But so we look at that, same thing, go right back under that diagnostic scope. We wash all the soil away so we can see the root system. One, that lets me see just how thick the thatch layer is, so that organic matter. And we want to keep that at a minimum the best we can, right? And that's achieved through things like vertical mowing or dethatching. Core aerification helps keep that down because this is where the fungi live. They hide in this thatch layer, and that's where the issues start. And it's also like a sponge. So if you got a really thick thatch layer, it's going to retain water longer than it should, and that leads to disease issues in itself. I get this question all the time about, what can we do to manage diseases other than spray fungicides? And these are the things you can do. It's cultural practices, right? Managing the thatch layer, mowing at the right height, fertilizing at the right times, watering at the right times. If you do all of those things, they go a really long ways to reduce disease pressure, all right? When you get down in there, we'll look at things like stolons and rhizomes, so those below ground plant parts, and we'll see fungal activity. This is spring dead spot on Bermuda grass, forms a very unique structure on there that we can identify at that stage. Once again, we have not even gone under a compound microscope yet. This is all with a dissecting scope or even with a hand lens. Like I said, you could use a little jeweler's loupe or whatever and still see all these things. But oftentimes we do have to go under the microscope. We'll see necrotic areas in the crown of the plant. We'll see the root system is starting to get necrotic. It kind of reminds me of shrimp. Here we go with food again, all these food references. But it kind of looks like shrimp with, the little veins or thing down the back or whatever. But that's necrotic. That's the vascular cylinder of the root system that's being attacked by a fungus. And that's where fungi go. So when they attack a root system, they're going to go for the vascular cylinder. That's where the sugars are. That's where the goodies are. And oftentimes you'll see that. You'll see the middle of the root is turning brown more so than the outside area, right? So to be able to identify those, we do have to go to the compound scope. And this is just looking at our turfgrass root. And this is probably at like 200 to 400 times magnification. And then we'll see the fungi. So in this case, this is a disease known as summer patch, but you can see the hyphae or the body of the fungus growing right along that vascular cylinder in the root. And that's where it's punching its little pegs in to get the food. And that's how we identify that, right? Sometimes you'll see other organisms like Pythium. Pythium root rot is very common. They'll leave spores behind, what are known as oospores. And once again, you can see how they're centered right over top of that vascular cylinder, a key diagnostic feature. The other thing we'll see under the microscope, like I said, are mycelium or hyphae. This is Pythium hyphae, very unique in that it looks very grainy looking, doesn't have cross walls and things like that. But thankfully, all these fungi and stuff do look different under the microscope, because if they all look the same, it would be a real challenge to identify these things. But they do have key features that makes it a little bit easier. A lot of fungi do produce spores, and there'll be different shapes and sizes. This is a spore of anthracnose. They look like little bananas with an oil drop right in the middle. There's nothing else that looks like that, so it makes it very easy to identify when we're looking at that one. And then that's it, right? So once it is some science, as I said, but a lot of it's just repetition and art. Just like speaking a second language. If you use it all the time and you're fluent in it, it's easy. But if you don't do it often enough, it can be a challenge, right? I do get this question a lot, and that's do we culture fungi and extract DNA for identification? And we do that quite frequently, but most of the time that's because of a research issue or something along those lines. For day-to-day diagnostics, we don't use this technology. It takes too long. Most folks need an answer within 1 to 2 days. But if it's a new disease, which we do see new diseases on occasion, we will isolate them, collect them, extract the DNA. We can sequence the DNA and get a very accurate identification of the species and things like that. But day-to-day, we don't use that. So if you've never submitted a sample before, you get a report back from us. It looks something like this. They'll just say, we found disease A, we found this disease, we found that disease. Here are some links, and that takes you to turf files. And those little disease profiles and turf files, they tell you pretty much everything you need to know about when it happens, why it happens, and how to manage it. We'll give you cultural management tips if they exist. And then you have the fungicide recommendations at the bottom. And then below that, there are usually a lot of photos too to help compare to what you're seeing if you want to match them up. But pretty straightforward. It just says, this is what we found. Go here to learn more. If you have any questions, let me know. All right. Moving on now, just want to talk about fungicides real quick. Because like I said, we can do all things perfect, but sometimes we do have to use fungicides, especially in high value properties where the tolerance for damage is minimal. So you know, you think about tall fescue in North Carolina, you know, brown patch and tall fescue is almost inevitable. It's going to happen, especially in higher maintained tall fescue. You're going to see it. The canopies are dense, they hold moisture. And so we often have to apply fungicides to control them. So a couple of things to remember, and I think this is probably the most important thing to remember, is that fungicides don't actually kill the fungus. Now, they do kill the individual cells they come into contact with, but they don't kill the entire body of the fungus. And that's why we have to make repeat applications. So I get that question a lot. I applied you know, this fungicide. My yard looked great for a couple of weeks, and now it's back. And the reason it's back is because that fungicide does wear off. You're really only kind of suppressing the fungus. You're putting it on pause for a little bit. And as soon as that breaks down and wears off, you have to make repeat applications. So something like brown patch and tall fescue, you know, you got to make monthly applications, usually like May, June, July, sometimes August, to get through the summer months. All right. Skip through this. Safety wise, I do like sharing this one. This is always interesting. We talk about the safety of fungicides. In the grand scheme of things, fungicides are pretty safe. When you talk about the oral LD50, if you're not familiar with toxicology, what this means is that if everybody in this room were to take 1 milligram per your kilogram of body weight, it would kill 50% of us, right? I know that's a little morbid sounding, but just it gives you a way to visualize these things. So insecticides tend to be some of the more dangerous pesticides out there because they act on nervous systems. Insects are animals just like us. So a lot of the things that those insecticides are acting on, they also would act on us. So it makes it dangerous. But look at some common things that we're all familiar with, all right? So nicotine, caffeine, ibuprofen, which is Advil, table salt, alcohol, and then there's a couple fungicides down in here, chlorothalonil, triadomethan, and you can see they're very similar, right? But toxicology 101 is it's the dose that makes the poison, right? It's all about exposure and things like that. I'm not suggesting, you know, I always have, because I like sharing this with the college students, especially because I remind them on a home football weekend, you know, the amount of nicotine, caffeine, and alcohol and salt they consume over the course of a weekend is probably doing far more damage to their body than they'll ever do, you know, being in the green industry. But, you know, following PPE and all that stuff, of course, like I say, you don't get crazy with it. But fungicides in the grand scheme of things are pretty safe products, all right? Understanding how fungicides move in plant, this is the other thing that confuses people, and I think where people get in trouble because they will pick the right fungicide, but they may not understand how it works, and that's where we'll see failures. There are a couple fungicides out there, but they're only for commercial use only. That are what are known as contact fungicides. So that just goes right on the leaf surface. It's kind of like paint, if you will. The plant does not soak it up or move it around at all. Then we have what are known as localized penetrants. Those are available to everybody. To me, that's like you spill something on the counter, put a paper towel on it, and it just kind of soaks into the paper towel. But it's not moving it out to all the corners of the paper towel. So it does soak through the leaf blade, but the plant doesn't move it. The majority of the fungicides we use are what are known as systemic, which means they're absorbed and they translocate. And the overwhelming majority of those, especially those available to lawn care, landscape, commercial, residential management, they move upward only. The only true systemic fungicides that move up and down are known as the phosphites, and those are only labeled for golf turf. So products like Appear, Alliette Signature, if you've ever heard of those, they do move up and down in the plant, but the majority of what we're using moves upward only. And I'll explain why that's important here in just a second. But this is a very good illustration or a visualization of that to understand what the heck I was just talking about, right? So these are leaves of wheat that have a disease known as powdery mildew. If you look at the top, you see this is an untreated leaf. It's completely devastated with powdery mildew. And then go down to the third leaf here. This is a Zoxystrobin or Heritage, which is probably the most used fungicide in home lawns. It's an acropoidal penetrant, so it moves upward in the plant. So you can actually see the residue where they put the fungicide on the leaf blade. It soaked into the leaf blade, and then that wheat plant moved it all the way out to the leaf tip. So you got phenomenal control of powdery mildew out to the leaf tip, but none of it went down back to the roots, right? And then number 4 is that localized penetrant. That's the one that just kind of soaks in, but it doesn't move it up or down. The reason that's important is if you're trying to treat a disease that's in the root system, okay? and you apply something like Heritage, which is an acropoidal penetrant, and you put it out in 1 to 2 gallons of water and you get it across the foliage, it's going to fail 100% of the time because it's not going to make it to the target, which is down in the root zone. So we have to up our carrier volume to a very high carrier volume, or it needs to be watered in. And watering it in is the preferred method, right? So if you're dealing with a soil-borne or root disease, something like spring dead spot and things like that, you have to water it in or it's just not going to work. And that makes it a challenge. And these are the diseases that give people the most fits, or the ones that are attacking the root system. The things that are in the foliage, we can manage those pretty easy. And it has everything to do with getting that fungicide on target, right? I'm going to speed forward just a little bit here. And just to show you, this is probably the best illustration of that very thing. So these are little pots of turf. On the left side, it says uninoculated, so no fungus, no disease. And then on the right side, we inoculated with a soil-borne or root disease known as summer patch, all right? And then we treat them with a fungicide that's highly effective against that disease. So if you look at the one on the bottom right, it says 0 inches of irrigation. So we applied the fungicide, didn't water it in. Then we did 1/10 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch, and 1/4 of an inch. And you can see, and that's why we settle. So when you look at our profiles, you'll see we recommend that you go somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 inch of irrigation to make sure you get that fungicide down on target and you get great control. But you have to move it down in there in order to be effective, or like you see here, it will not work. All right. Now I'm just going to go through real quick. Ashley, how much time do we have before you're going to take a break?
You have up to probably 15 or 20 minutes more. So you're okay.
That's perfect. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is from a colleague at the University of Missouri. We've done very similar studies, but I just use his slide because I'm just being lazy. But and the question is, what about granular fungicides? Because granular fungicides are a lot easier for the average user to go out and spread on their own versus spraying. Spraying, you have to have the right equipment. It has to be calibrated. You have to know what you're doing in order to be effective with that. Oftentimes, for homeowners, I suggest that they hire a professional, right? Professional landscapers are trained. They have pesticide license, all that good stuff. They know what they're doing. So, just do that. Oftentimes, it can actually be cheaper than trying to do it on your own. But I get it. I'm a do-it-yourselfer for a lot of stuff, and you just want to do it. But granular fungicides are easier to apply, and they do work. And that's the question I get: are how good are granular fungicides? And that's what this is looking at. So this is Heritage. So you got the liquid formulation at 2 different rates, and then you see the granular formulations. Headway, another very common fungicide that gets used in home lawns. Same thing, the liquid versus the granular, and you can see they're pretty close to being the same. But the liquid versions tend to be a little bit better than the granular versions. So, you can use them and they will work, but it may not be, as good. And when I say not as good, if the liquid version gives you 100% control, the granular versions will probably give you 95% control. It's acceptable, right? And it's not the case for all granular products. So there are fungicides out there, granular versions that don't work all that well at all. And it has nothing to do with the active ingredient itself. It has to do with the how they're carrying it out on the prill itself. So the technology isn't quite the same. But the 2 products that I've seen over the years work the best are Heritage G and Headway G, both made by Syngenta. Those work very well. Pillar G is another one that's not in this that works pretty well also, that's made by BASF. All right. Another question I get oftentimes is, I just applied a fungicide to my yard and it poured down rain. Do I need to reapply? And the answer is probably no. All right. So we've done simulated rainfall events. We've done half-inch rainfall events immediately after spraying, and we still got phenomenal foliar disease control of brown patch. Right. And that's what this is brown patch and tall fescue. But this has, once again, go back and remember, these are fungicides that move up in the plant. So even though the rain washed it off the leaf, it went into the soil, the roots still pick up the fungicide and bring it right back to the top, and you still get good control, right? So typically no worries there about that. The other question I get a lot is, what about alternative products, so organic products or biopesticides or biofungicides? The answer to that is it's complicated. the majority of products that we've tested, and we do test a lot over the years, they just don't work. The environment is just too much for these products to hold up here in North Carolina, right? There was one product, and is one product called Zeo. Is actually made by a company here in RTP called Ag Biome. If you've never heard of them, they're a fantastic company. It's pretty neat, actually. These folks go out and harvest thousands of bacteria from everywhere, from the soil. They've told me they've harvested them off car bumpers, windshields, where they get bacteria from everywhere, and they screen these bacteria to see if they have any activity against fungi and nematodes. And that's what Zeo is, all right? And we've seen it actually give decent control of brown patch. It's not as good as the industry standard Heritage, but it does give some suppression, right? And that's just a photo showing that, all right? Want to move into, so back to that just real quick. So that is out there, and it does work somewhat good. It is interesting, and I think it's important to note that Heritage is actually that fungicide, which is probably the most commonly used fungicide in home lawns, was actually derived from a mushroom. So it is a byproduct of a mushroom. They noticed that this particular mushroom was able to fend off other mushrooms, if you will. They were able to identify the key compound in there and synthesize it. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Heritage is on the OMRI. It's on the safer product list, whatever they call it. So it is a very safe product. But it's pretty neat that you're kind of using fire to fight fire, I think. All right. So just want to go through some real quick diseases that are common. The most common one you're going to see is brown patch and tall fescue. Notice it does create those circles of grass, but it does create a very unique lesion on the leaf blade. So you see those kind of brownish lesions, has that chocolate brown border, very irregular shape. This is what you're scouting for. So in May, usually like mid to late May, if you want to look for brown patch, start looking at the leaves, right? Looking down at the ground, because you'll see these before you see the big giant circles, all right? So pretty easy to scout for. Couple things, just going to speed through this a little bit. Initially, it was thought that nitrogen made brown patch more severe. We've since debunked that. It is okay. The majority of your nitrogen needs to go out in the fall and the spring. But in the summer months, it is okay to give tall fescue a little bit of fertilizer. When I say a little bit, I'm talking about a 1/4 pound to a 1/2 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. Because what you have to think about is if you have a home lawn that's damaged by a disease, you can apply a fungicide and you're going to suppress that fungus. But our cool season grasses like tall fescue aren't growing all that good in the summer months. So, if the last time you fertilized was March and now we're in June, it's been months ago since that plant had a food source. It's okay just to give it a little push, and that's how it's going to recover. It's going to grow new leaves, things like that. It's going to push out the old stuff. You're going to mow it off, and it will recover quite well. And you're not going to agitate brown patch and make it more severe. So that's the bottom line of all that. Another disease you have to be on the lookout for, and it's becoming more and more common, is gray leaf spot. The picture here on the left is on tall fescue. On the right is St. Augustine grass. We really don't see St. Augustine around here, but just to show you that the little leaf spots are the same. And it does look different from brown patch. So you're getting these nice little circular spots, whereas brown patch is very irregular. So fungicide control is different. So, it's one of those ones you kind of want to learn the difference between the two. Where brown patch starts in like May, June, you usually don't see gray leaf spot till like late July, early August. It's later in the summer is when you see that one, okay? You can see here, this is in Rollsville, up at Pure Seed Testing, a little turf research farm, where we did some research. You can see just how devastating gray leaf spot can be when it's severe. These little blocks, the squares you see that look good, those were treated with a fungicide that works well against that disease, thiophanate methyl. So it can be very devastating. There have been years where we've seen, folks' lawns get wiped out by this. So you take that and couple it with fall armyworms. If any of you have had to deal with that this year, it's been a really bad year for fall armyworms. And you can have some home lawns get severely devastated. So be on the lookout for that. Large patch, this is on the warm season grasses. So if any of you see things like zoysia, St. Augustine, and you really don't see much St. Augustine or centipede. So around here, it's zoysia and Bermuda. Is the one you're going to see the most. It does cause these giant large circles in the fall of the year and the spring. So this is active right now. We have a lot of this at our research farm right now. Very, very common disease. It's actually caused by the same fungus that causes brown patch and tall fescue, just a different time of year. All right. On Bermuda grass, it's rare that it causes significant damage. We're actually looking at two diseases here. One is spring dead spot, which you see there, and then you can see the larger patches or the large patch. It usually recovers just fine on its own, but in zoysia grass, it can be very devastating, as well as centipede. Key diagnostic feature is looking on those leaf sheaths. You'll see that lesion just like you did on the tall fescue, but instead of seeing it up on the leaf blade, you actually see it on the sheath that's, and it's typically the part that's touching the soil or the dirt, if you will. All right. Just another picture of large patch, just showing you what it looks like. Once again, large patches tend to be circular in nature, pretty easy to identify. There's really not much else that'll cause that in the spring or the fall of the year. All right. I want to skip through that, and I want to wrap up with fairy ring. Because this is the one I get a lot of questions from, particularly from homeowners, because they are fascinating, right? They produce the mushrooms, and you get a lot of questions about that. And one of the questions I often get is, how do I control the mushrooms? And usually just mowing, right? Just frequent mowing. When you get rainfall events, they will pop up, but they do go away. There are fungicides that will help, but just frequent mowing will help with it most of the time, right? The other question I get a lot is are they dangerous? Like, you know, if little Johnny goes and eats one, or my dog eats one, and the answer is that it can be, right? Some fairy ring fungi can be poisonous. So if you're not sure, you can send pictures to me. You can send mushrooms into the clinic, and we'll identify them for you and let you know. On the flip side of that, some of these are actually very good to eat, right? But you got to be careful with that, right? You know, the only bad mushroom mycologist is a dead one, or whatever the saying is. So you got to be careful with that. All right. So be sure you know what you're doing. I love showing this photo. You know, fairy rings are actually probably the if you go back and look in history and in literature, as far as turfgrass diseases go, fairy ring, you can go way back. Even I think Shakespeare talks about them. In some of his works, they'll talk about fairy rings, circles of mushrooms. You'll see them in drawings. But this one cracks me up, from 1880. It's called Plucked from the Fairy Circle, right? A man saves his friend from the grip of a fairy ring. And you can see, and if you've ever seen fairy rings in turf, it does cause a dark green ring, right? Where it's releasing nitrogen back into the soil. But, you know, in this case, this fella's dancing with the fairies. I'm not sure what kind of mushrooms he ate in this case, but it looks like he's having quite the experience, and his friend's trying to save his life. But that's just funny that's out there, right? Conditions that favor fairy ring: sandy soils tend to make it more severe, and you'll see why in a second, and nitrogen deficiency, right? 3 different types. You can have the worst type is when you have the dead ring of turf. The more common, you'll see the green ring, or you'll see the ring of mushrooms, or you can have any combination of all those. So type 1 fairy ring, this is where you get the dead ring. And take note that they're not always perfect rings. Sometimes they'll be horseshoe shaped or C shaped or whatever, crescent shaped. But that's the most severe case, right? They'll coalesce together and they'll look like a bunch of rings like this. A lot of times you'll just see the green ring like that, or you'll see an arc of mushrooms like this in a home lawn, right? It can be any combination of all those. So what's unique about fairy ring fungi is they don't actually kill the turfgrass plant. They don't feed on the turfgrass plant at all. Whereas all of our other diseases actually eat the turfgrass plant. All this little guy is messing up our soil profile. So produces this tremendous amount of fungal growth in the soil, and it makes it hydrophobic. So it repels water, and that's ultimately what kills the turf. So if you're curious as to whether or not you have something like this and it's a fairy ring, just stick a screwdriver or a knife or dig it up, and you'll see it'll be bone dry, almost like it's been baked in an oven. It's amazing how well it repels water. All right. A good illustration of that is, this is a photo that one of our students took many years ago, but here's a drop of water that he had placed on a fairy ring plug. And this was like 4 or 5 days prior to this photo. And then he placed another drop of water just to show, but that's been sitting there and it does not go into the soil. It's repelling the water away from it. So with that being said, one of the best ways to manage these things is to break it up. So aerify, punch holes through that zone. You can use what's known as wetting agents, which is nothing but a fancy term for soap, which helps to break the surface tension and re-wet the soil. All right. That's what I'm showing here, just punching holes to help open it back up. Fertilizer, fairy rings are often more severe in nitrogen deficient turf. So you can see this was a fertility study at our farm here in Raleigh. And you can see these green rings everywhere where there's not well fertilized. But as soon as you get into the well fertilized plots, you don't see those green rings anymore. All right. So I'm going to skip through and wrap it up. And I'm going to look into the chat box for questions. There's my info. If any of you ever want to reach out to me, please do. This is what we're here for. And so let's jump into the chat box here and back up to the top. So it looks like everybody hungry.
There's a good number of questions about how to get cheeseburgers off the brain.
Okay, here we go. So do fungicides kill endophytic grass? That's a good question. So endophytic grass, we've never looked at that specifically in our program, but I will say, and I'm glad that you asked that, Jane, because one thing you have to keep in mind is when we do apply fungicides, let's say we're targeting brown patch. It would be super cool if we were just only killing the brown patch fungus, right? But we're affecting other organisms in the profile. However, there have been tremendous amounts of research done that show that we're not having an overall negative impact on the soil microbiome. Some of the healthiest soils in the world are turfgrass systems, and even those that are heavily treated. So you go to a golf course putting green or a high-end athletic field that gets a lot of products thrown at it, they have some of the most robust and diverse bacterial and fungal communities that there are. But I would be willing to bet that it's safe to apply those. I don't think you're going to wipe out completely the endophytes that are there. So that's a good question. I've heard about professional landscapers selling chemical aeration to homeowners. I don't think that works. There's been work done on that. There are things, the best place to look for stuff like that's in the golf business, because they're always on the cutting edge for stuff like that. They'll use things like molasses and other things like that to try to get things to degrade a little bit faster, but nothing's ever going to replace the physical removal of that material. All right. AgBiome is a cool company. I agree with that. If you ever get I don't know how much they open it up to the public for tours, but it is a really neat place to go tour. I've been up there a couple of times with those folks. A lot of times they bring their dogs to work, and I'm like, man, this is a pretty neat place, man. I like to take my dog to work. Okay. I never thought I'd find turf interesting. I'm glad I could make it interesting for you. Gray leaf spot it does attack cool season turf. So they're asking, is gray leaf spot predominantly on cool season turf? For us, our biggest issue up here is going to be on tall fescue. If you ever do any overseeding with ryegrass, it'll be an issue on that as well. But outside of that, it's more down towards the coast on St. Augustine grass as well. We see it on that. And that looks like all of the questions, unless anybody wants to unmute and ask one. That's all I have.
Awesome. That was great. Thanks, Lee. That was really fun. I am hungry though, but it's fine.
My bad.
No, it's something we all feel strongly about, so I like it.
Yeah, it keeps us motivated.
Awesome. Okay, so thank you so much, Lee. We are going to take about a 15-minute break, and then we will be back with Grady Miller for our second talk. And so, Lee, if you want to, we thank you for your service.
Thank you all. I enjoyed it. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week. We promise we will submit
good samples, and they will be on the leading edge.
All right. Thanks. Y'all have a good one.
All right. Thanks so much. All right. So everyone, we're just going to take about a 15-minute break. Be back at 10:30. It's a good time to get your coffee, stretch your legs, contemplate what's going on in the front yard, whatever you need to do. So I'll be in and out, but see you guys at 10:30.